What do you know about the Bracero program?
About the what?
Bracero program.
I haven't heard of it.
Nothing.
I don't know that.
In August 1942, the Mexican and American governments agreed to the 1942 Executive Agreement, which allowed Mexicans to come work in the United States, most commonly in the fields. The 1942 Executive Agreement could not have come at a better time for American farmers because they were worried about having few laborers working in the fields. Having few laborers was not rare in the 1940s. When we think about the fact that the United States had just entered World War II, American participation in the war meant that American citizens were more willing to work in war industries than in agriculture. So, the agreement between the Mexican and American governments led to a new period where Mexicans left their native land in greater numbers to work north of the border. This move showed that the greater number of Mexican immigrants would have a large impact on both the Mexican worker and the American economy. The 1942 Executive Agreement between the United States and Mexico was beneficial to some. American farmers believed that having Mexican workers in the fields was beneficial for the American economy because without braceros, as Mexican laborers working in the fields were most commonly known as, the United States would have never been able to harvest the crops that were in demand. If the program had not been in place, American farmers would have likely lost money and the American economy would have not grown as much as it did. For these reasons, it was no wonder that the American farmers supported the Bracero program. Not only did some Americans believe that the Bracero program was beneficial to the American economy, but there was also the general thought that it would be better for Mexican workers to work in the United States than stay in Mexico. During the mid-20th century, there did not exist that many opportunities for Mexicans to prosper. Mexicans instead had to face many problems that included, but were not limited to, high birth rates, high unemployment and underemployment, relatively low wages, and widespread poverty. These problems resulted from the violent Mexican Revolution that occurred at the turn of the 20th century. The Mexican Revolution slowed down the economy because people could still not get back on their feet, even after the war ended. With these conditions, it is little wonder that many other Mexicans were willing to leave Mexico, one of which was my grandfather, Juan Gradilla. My grandfather first came to the United States in 1951, when he was 21 years old. My grandfather was ecstatic that he had found a job north of the border, because he had for some time heard about the Bracero program from people that lived near him. My grandfather stated that people in Los Pericos, Jalisco, would always be talking about how working in the norte was the only way to earn higher wages and a better life. But for my grandfather, working in the norte not only meant better money, but also finally the opportunity to come see what el norte was. Like every other Mexican worker, they came to the United States under the Bracero program. My grandfather agreed to a contract. It was important for the American government to have in place a requirement limiting the number of contracts that would be available for Mexicans because only the necessary number of laborers needed to keep the agricultural sector to prosper was going to be allowed into the country. By setting this demand, the American government wanted to show that they did not want uncontrolled Mexican migration into the United States. Like the United States had requirements for the Bracero program, the Mexican government also had requirements that Americans had to follow. For the Mexican government, one of the many requirements was that Mexicans would enjoy guarantees of transportation, living expenses, in accordance with the Mexican labor law. In my grandfather's case, this requirement was met because the ranch owner that my grandfather had a contract with set up a bus that would bring my grandfather to work in Oxnard, California. In Oxnard, my grandfather had meals in a small house that he lived in with other laborers. So with this contract, my grandfather worked in Oxnard for 3 months and then came back to Mexico with the opportunity to improve his and his family's life in Mexico. For this reason, my grandfather decided to come back to the fields from 1957 through 1960. But after the Bracero program ended in 1964, it was not until his male children were in their teens that my grandfather decided that he would come back to the United States to work in the fields, because he wanted his children to accompany him. As a result, it becomes clear that the Bracero program in the United States had many lasting effects in both countries, because it impacted the lives of many people on both sides of the border. The Bracero program proved to be an important component of both Mexican and American history.